All right, thanks so much for hanging out. Now, today is about the law of accepting your shadow. That's law number 3. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and keeps great content coming your way. Oh, and if you haven't checked out Part 1 and Part 2 yet, make sure you do. In those episodes, I covered 2 powerful laws that set the foundation for what we're talking about today. Trust me, following along in order will keep you in the rhythm and make the journey even more impactful. Law number 3, accept your shadow. What you refuse to see in yourself will be used against you by others. The most dangerous enemy is the one you refuse to acknowledge, and nowhere is that more true than in the war you wage within yourself. Every human being carries a shadow, a collection of impulses, fears, weaknesses, and desires that we prefer to hide from the world. Some of these are inherited from our nature, others shaped by the circumstances of our upbringing, still others forged in the crucible of choices we would rather forget. The shadow does not disappear because we ignore it. It grows, silently influencing our thoughts, decisions, and actions. Those who cannot see their shadow are destined to be ruled by it. The general who hides his arrogance beneath a mask of humility will one day make a decision to prove himself that costs him everything. The ruler who denies his greed will spend years justifying policies that enrich himself at the expense of the realm, all while insisting it is for the public good. The negotiator who will not admit fear will take reckless risks to convince himself he is brave. The more fiercely we deny the parts of ourselves we dislike, the more easily they control us. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who gave us the term shadow, warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is not abstract philosophy, it is a strategic warning. An opponent who knows your unacknowledged weakness has a lever with which to move you at will. The ones who accept their flaws, however, rob others of this power. History is rich with leaders undone by the shadow they refuse to face. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, could never admit his deep hunger for military glory. His shadow whispered that without battlefield triumphs, his fortune meant little. This unseen driver led him to launch an ill-fated campaign against Parthia, where he was decisively defeated and killed, his death marking the end of the first triumvirate and altering Rome's course. His flaw was not ambition itself, but his refusal to see how that ambition was rooted in personal insecurity. In contrast, we find leaders who have mastered this law by confronting and owning their darker aspects. Abraham Lincoln was known for his melancholy, a trait that might have crippled another man's leadership. But Lincoln did not hide from it. He recognized it, spoke of it openly to friends, and even used it to deepen his empathy for others. In times of crisis, this awareness allowed him to temper his judgment with patience and understanding, rather than allowing his moods to silently shape his decisions. To accept your shadow is not to indulge it, but to integrate it into your strategy. The samurai of feudal Japan trained to face death without fear, not because they wished to die, but because they understood that denying death made it harder to act clearly in its presence. Likewise, a ruler who admits his ambition can channel it into building something lasting rather than pretending it is selflessness and letting it twist his judgment in secret. In religion, the call to face the shadow is often framed in moral and spiritual terms, but its strategic implications are the same. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from craving and aversion, both forms of the shadow. One cannot eliminate them by pretending they do not exist. One must observe them without attachment, seeing them clearly for what they are. Jesus, in warning against hypocrisy, urged his followers to first take the beam out of your own eye, an acknowledgement that one's own flaws must be faced before judging others. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna guides Arjuna to confront his doubts and fears directly, rather than disguising them with noble-sounding excuses. In each case, the teaching is the same. Denial blinds you, acknowledgement sharpens you. Strategically, there is immense power in owning your shadow. When you openly acknowledge your flaws, you make them harder for others to weaponize against you. The adversary who seeks to embarrass you with a truth you already accept will find no leverage. Moreover, knowing your own darker impulses allows you to anticipate when they might influence your choices and to choose differently in the moments that matter. Those who fail in this law are like castles with hidden cracks in the walls. Outwardly they appear strong, but a patient enemy who knows where to press can bring the entire structure down. Those who follow it are like fortresses whose weaknesses are already reinforced from within. The enemy may strike there, but the walls will hold. An unacknowledged shadow is a map to your undoing, and history's cunning players have always known how to read it. Political rivals, court intriguers, and battlefield adversaries often need no grand scheme to topple a leader, only the patience to watch for the moment when an unowned flaw takes control. In the late 16th century, the Earl of Essex, a favorite of England's Queen Elizabeth I, was undone not by treachery but by his own vanity. Essex could not bear to appear less favored than his rivals. His enemies at court fed this insecurity with subtle slights and calculated provocations, each designed to push him into actions that appeared defiant toward the Queen. When the moment came, his unchecked pride, his shadow, led him into a botched uprising. Elizabeth, who had once adored him, signed his death warrant. Those who knew Essex's weakness did not need to defeat him directly. They simply allowed his shadow to do the work. In warfare, the exploitation of an opponent's shadow often takes the form of psychological feints. Napoleon's enemies learned to bait his desire for decisive battle, drawing him into engagements that sapped his resources. In the business world, negotiations are sometimes shaped not by the actual terms, but by appealing to the other side's need to win in a public sense. Those who cannot see this hunger in themselves will accept unfavorable deals simply to appear dominant. But the opposite is also true. Those who have confronted and accepted their shadow gain an advantage few can match. Winston Churchill was not blind to his own flaws. He knew he could be impulsive, overconfident, and prone to grand, risky ventures. Rather than pretending otherwise, he surrounded himself with advisors who would challenge him directly, building a system to counterbalance his tendencies. The man who knows his weakness can fortify against it. The man who denies it leaves it unguarded. There is also power in calculated disclosure. In the ancient courts of China, a minister might preempt an accusation by confessing a lesser fault before the emperor, framing it as a lesson learned. This stripped enemies of their chance to frame the fault as scandal, and sometimes turned it into a mark of humility. In modern politics, candidates who openly speak of past mistakes often appear stronger for it. Their critics, deprived of surprise, are left with no new weapon. Owning your shadow also allows you to turn it into a source of connection. A leader who admits to moments of doubt earns the trust of those who share such feelings but have never spoken them aloud. In this way, the shadow becomes not only a private defense but a public asset, deepening loyalty among followers. Yet there are times when the shadow is best kept hidden, not from yourself, but from those who would use it without hesitation. This is the art of strategic concealment. A general may know he is vulnerable to frustration, but he learns to mask it behind a calm exterior, denying opponents the satisfaction of seeing their bait take hold. A negotiator, aware of his eagerness for agreement, will rehearse restraint until the eagerness is invisible, preserving his leverage. The shadow's greatest danger lies not in its existence, but in its control over your choices when unseen. The moment you bring it into the light, you gain the choice to wield it, reshape it, or neutralize it. This is why ancient warrior cultures placed such emphasis on confronting fear, pride, and desire before stepping onto the battlefield. They knew that a sword in the hand is useless if the mind holding it is already captured by unseen forces within. The call to face one's shadow echoes across religions and philosophies, though expressed in different tongues. In Buddhism, the practice of vipassana meditation is not an escape from suffering, but a direct observation of it, a method for seeing the mind's cravings, fears, and resentments without judgment. The Buddha himself, in the night of his enlightenment, faced Mara, the personification of temptation and fear. Mara's armies, his seductive daughters, and his whispers of doubt were not external demons in the way most imagine. They were projections of the mind's own darkness. By recognizing them as such, the Buddha rendered them powerless. In Christian scripture, the desert temptation of Jesus is another mirror to this principle. After 40 days of fasting, he faced the devil, who offered him bread for hunger, dominion over kingdoms, and the chance to prove his divinity through spectacle. These were not random trials. They touched the core desires any human might feel: survival, power, recognition. By naming and rejecting them, Jesus demonstrated that knowing the temptation is the first step to mastering it. To act as though such desires do not exist is to be their captive. To acknowledge them is to choose their place in one's life. In the Hindu Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's paralysis on the battlefield comes from a conflict between his warrior duty and his compassion for those arrayed against him, many of whom are his own kin. Lord Krishna does not tell Arjuna to suppress this turmoil. Instead, he teaches him to see clearly the nature of his duty, his attachments, and the illusions clouding his mind. By facing his inner conflict rather than fleeing from it, Arjuna gains the clarity to act without his shadow ruling him in secret. Even the Stoics, often thought of as advocating the suppression of emotion, in truth called for engagement with it. Seneca advised that anger, left unexamined, is like an untrained horse. It will carry you where you did not intend to go. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself in his Meditations, acknowledging vanity, irritation, and the lure of praise, not to banish them, but to keep them from governing him. This was the practice of bringing the shadow into the open, where it could be addressed with reason. Shadows do not belong only to individuals, they belong to societies and civilizations. A collective shadow forms when a culture refuses to acknowledge certain truths about itself, its injustices, its cruelties, its unspoken ambitions. Like the personal shadow, this collective darkness will eventually assert itself, often in destructive ways. Rome's collective shadow was its appetite for conquest. For centuries, it justified expansion as defense or civilizing mission, never admitting that it had become addicted to the spoils of war. When expansion finally stalled, the internal machinery built to support constant campaigns turned inward, consuming the republic itself in civil wars. Colonial empires often cloaked economic exploitation in the language of progress and civilization. While the denial lasted, it allowed expansion to continue unchecked, but the suppressed truth eroded legitimacy from within. When the reckoning came, it was sudden and irreversible, as the shadow long denied broke through in revolutions and independence movements. Even modern nations face their collective shadows in the form of systemic inequalities, environmental destruction, or the refusal to confront past atrocities. The longer these shadows remain unacknowledged, the more unpredictable their eruption will be. States that endure are those that, however imperfectly, bring their shadows into the open and address them before they dictate history's terms. The long game in power demands this law as much as any other. Short-term gains can be won through charm, manipulation, or sheer force, but lasting influence requires stability within. The leader who knows their own shadow can prepare for the moments when it threatens to rise, just as a fortress reinforces the wall that has withstood storms before. In contrast, the leader who hides from their shadow may stand in full armor, yet fall to the first subtle strike that exploits an unseen crack. To accept your shadow is to carry your weakness openly enough that it no longer surprises you or anyone else. This makes you unreadable in the way that matters most. You cannot be baited, you cannot be manipulated into self-destruction, and you cannot be humiliated by truths you have already embraced. Civilizations survive by the same principle. Those that can admit their failings and correct them maintain the reserves of trust, legitimacy, and moral authority to endure crises. Those that cannot are undone not by the enemy outside the gates, but by the shadows gathering within their walls. To accept your shadow is also to accept your past, not as a burden to be erased, but as the raw material from which your present self has been forged. Every victory, every failure, every mistake you swore never to repeat has shaped you into the strategist, leader, and human being you are now. Those who run from their past become fugitives from their own power. Those who integrate it walk into any room with the unshakable weight of lived experience. The warrior who has known defeat does not fear it. The merchant who has endured ruin is harder to unsettle in negotiation. The statesman who has survived scandal can face public storms with a calm born of survival. Your past is not your enemy. It is your training ground. But only when you stop pretending it is something other than it was can you draw its full strength into the present. In the Hindu Ramayana, Lord Rama faces exile, the loss of his kingdom, and the abduction of his wife. These trials are not random misfortunes. They are the crucible that refines his character. Without the exile, there is no wisdom to temper his kingship. Without the battles, there is no victory that resonates across ages. In Greek mythology, Heracles' labors, penance for crimes committed in a moment of madness, do not erase his shadow, but transform it into the foundation of his legendary strength. In both, the past is not erased. It is transmuted. Christian tradition frames the past as something that can be redeemed. Paul the Apostle, once a persecutor of the early church, becomes one of its most tireless builders. His previous zeal, when turned toward a new cause, becomes a force that carries the message across empires. The Buddha's early life as a sheltered prince is not ignored. It becomes the very contrast that sharpens the meaning of his renunciation. In Norse mythology, even Odin's sacrifices, the loss of an eye for wisdom, the self hanging upon Yggdrasil, are acknowledgments that transformation demands a price, and that the self you emerge as is inseparable from what you have endured. When you own your past, you strip it of its power to be used against you. In psychological warfare, nothing unsettles an opponent more than the target who is unashamed of their own history. The enemy who expects you to flinch at mention of your failures is thrown off balance when you speak of them openly, even with pride for what they taught you. This openness turns potential weapons into shields. There is also a deeper strategic value in selective revelation. The art lies in deciding which parts of your past to share and when. To a potential ally, a story of hardship may inspire trust and connection. To a rival, the same story may be withheld, leaving them in the dark about the trials that forged you. Your shadow, past and present, becomes a tool you control, rather than a vulnerability they can exploit. Across civilizations, the acceptance of the past and the shadow has been tied to longevity and resilience. Nations that acknowledge their historical mistakes, even imperfectly, are better positioned to rebuild trust and adapt. Japan's post-war transformation into a technological and economic power was not possible without confronting the devastation of the war it had initiated. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, while far from flawless, allowed the nation to step forward without the full weight of apartheid's shadow crushing its new identity. This openness turns potential weapons into shields. Philosophically, this law asks for courage, not the courage to fight an external enemy, but the far rarer courage to face oneself. This courage is the root of self-mastery, and self-mastery is the root of enduring power. You cannot truly know your strength until you have looked at every part of yourself, the noble and the base, the proud and the shameful, and said, "This too is me." The past will always speak in your voice, whether in whispers or in shouts. When you claim it, you control the message. When you deny it, others will tell your story for you. The one who holds his shadow in his own hands casts it where he wills. The one who refuses to see it walks forever in its shape. The shadow is not an enemy to be slain, but a companion that walks beside you until your last day. It is the accumulation of every impulse you have denied, every fear you have turned from, every wound you have carried in silence. It has been with you in your triumphs and your failures, whispering to you in moments of doubt, standing quietly behind you in moments of glory. Those who seek to destroy their shadow wage a war they cannot win. The shadow is not a parasite, it is part of your nature. Like the night that follows day, it exists in balance with your light. In the Taoist yin-yang symbol, the dark contains a seed of light, and the light contains a seed of darkness. Both are needed for the circle to be whole. Religions and myths have always understood this truth. In Hinduism, Lord Shiva embodies both destruction and creation, forces that exist together, neither purely good nor evil. In Christianity, the wilderness is a place of both danger and preparation, where prophets and saints face their temptations before stepping into their missions. In the ancient Egyptian myth of Ra, each night the sun god must journey through the underworld, confronting the serpent Apophis before he can rise again. These stories are not merely cosmic adventures, they are mirrors of our inner journey, where each day we must face our own serpent before stepping into the light. In strategy, the shadow is not a weakness to be hidden, but a weapon to be wielded with precision. An experienced diplomat knows his own impatience and guards against it during delicate talks, sometimes even using a calculated display of frustration to shift the other side's position. A commander aware of his cautious nature can balance it with decisive aids, ensuring that hesitation does not cost the battle, yet also using that caution to avoid costly traps. The shadow, once acknowledged, becomes a versatile tool. It can be suppressed when it would harm you and displayed when it would unsettle others. Your past, with all its imperfections, is the training ground where you first learned to dance with this companion. The mistakes you regret taught you the contours of your shadow. The betrayals you endured showed you its resilience. The victories you achieved revealed how, even in darkness, it can move in harmony with your aims. If you stand here today with scars, they are not marks of shame, but medals from battles fought in the terrain of your own soul. The civilizations that have endured the longest are those that have learned to live with their collective shadow, acknowledging it without letting it devour them. Japan embraced the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki not to dwell in humiliation, but to anchor a new national identity. Germany, in confronting the horrors of its past, built a political culture with safeguards against repeating them. Civilizations that fail in this balance, Rome in its arrogance, the Soviet Union in its denial of internal decay, eventually collapse under the weight of the shadow they refuse to see. To accept your shadow, then, is to claim sovereignty over yourself. It is to walk through life knowing that your darkness walks with you, but never ahead of you. It is to look an enemy in the eye, unshaken by their attempt to remind you of what you already know. It is to use every part of yourself, the noble and the flawed, in service of a purpose greater than ego or fear. When you do this, the shadow ceases to be a threat. It becomes your armor in the day, your advisor in the night, your witness to the journey. You do not conquer it, you command it. The shadow that you own will guard your back. The shadow you deny will one day lead you into darkness. All right, that's a wrap for part 3. Thanks so much for today. I really appreciate your time and energy. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and keeps the content coming your way. And be sure to check out part 4, where we dive into Law 4, Practice Emotional Delay. And as usual, it's going to be a powerful one, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Until then, take care and keep growing. See you in the next one.